Rishos Rav Cohen. In this week's Parsha, we have one of the most mysterious stories. In elementary school, at least, we're taught that Yitzchak wants to give the better bracha to Esav because Esav deceives him. Yaakov was really a tzaddik, Esav a rasha. Rivka understood that. Yitzchak totally missed the boat. The version sort of makes Yitzchak looking like he's either stupid or totally righteous but divorced from reality. But if we read the psukim carefully, I think a very different picture emerges. First of all, if we look at the bracha that Yitzchak had intended to give Esav, we see the following: V'itein lecha lokim mital hashamayim u'shmanei haaretz v'rov dagan v'sirosh yavducha amim v'yishtachavu lecha leumim have gvir la'achecha v'yishtachavu lecha b'nei imecha orecha aror u'mvarachecha baruch. In summary, Yitzchak seeks to bench Esav with riches and power. What bracha did Yitzchak intend to give Yaakov? There was a bracha, and we see it at the end of the Parsha. When Yaakov is about to leave, Yitzchak tells him, V'itein lecha es birkas Avraham lecha u'zaracha itach l'rishtecha es eretz megurecha asher nasan Elokim l'Avraham. The Malbim points out a fascinating thing. It appears that Yitzchak always intended to give Birkas Avram, Avram's spiritual legacy, to Yaakov. The question was, the debate between Yitzchak and Rivka was, what about Gashmias? What about Olam Hazeh? Yitzchak felt that Yaakov, Ishtam, Yoshev, Ohalim, should be exclusively involved in Ruchnias. Rivka realized that Klal Yisrael needs to be involved in this world as well as the next. And that's why Rivka couldn't just come and tell Yitzchak what she felt, because this wasn't just a debate about personalities, but it was a philosophical debate about what Klal Yisrael is meant to be. Of course, Rivka was right. And while we are meant to devote our life to Ruchnias, we are also meant to be involved in Olam Hazeh. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we split our time. Half the day we're involved in Avodas Hashem, and the other half we can think of ourselves and our comfort. No. God demands the whole of us. But what it means is that Avodas Hashem encompasses both the Ruchnias and the Gashmias. So let's take another look at the bracha that Yaakov gets, the first bracha. Tal hashamayim, shmanei haaretz. It seems to me that this isn't just a bracha to get by. It's not a bracha for subsistence, but it's a bracha for prosperity. And indeed, many of the brachos in the Torah relate to prosperity. And this brings us to a very important question. What is the Torah's attitude towards wealth? On a personal level, is it appropriate to aspire to be rich? Or perhaps the Oved Hashem should merely seek to get by? Once a person has enough to support himself and his family, should he return to the world of Ruchnias, like the stories we've heard of the Chafetz Chaim and other tzaddikim? Or is it okay to keep on working, to try to make a little bit more? This is, of course, a very practical question that Talmidim your age wonder about, especially when considering what type of occupation to pursue. Is it okay to choose a profession that will make a lot more money, but will leave me with less time to learn? And also, what other factors go into considering career choices? Is the fact that I'll enjoy my job an important factor? Or is that irrelevant for the Oved Hashem, who seeks only to do what God wishes? Where does bitachon play a role in all of this? If Hashem determines what I'm going to make on Rosh Hashanah, then what point is there in working hard, in doing extra time at the office if it doesn't impact my bottom line? Does extra exertion imply a lack of bitachon? These are all big questions. We don't have much time. Some of them are indeed the subject of machlokas. But I'd like to look at a couple of makaros with you, which might help us to answer these questions. The first is a Gemara Nida Ayin Amud Beis. Ma yasa adam v'yis asher. What should a person do if they wish to get rich? Amar lahen yarbe b'schora. Do a lot of commerce. V'yisa v'yitein be'emuna, and be honest in your business. Amar lo harbe asu kein v'lo ho'ilu. There are a lot of people who did this and it didn't quite work out. Ella yivakesh rachamim mimisha osher shalo. You have to daven. My kamash malan, daha beloha lo sagi. One without the other won't work. There are two very important insights that we can glean from this Gemara. First of all, that wealth is an appropriate aspiration. Mayasa adam v'yis asher doesn't sound like, but this is not something a Ben Torah does. And secondly, generally speaking, riboy schora is needed to become wealthy. It's not enough to work a little and pray a lot. Ha below ha lo sagi. And that shouldn't be surprising. We all know ein somchen al hanes. To expect to get rich without working hard is to expect a miracle. The way up the corporate ladder, at least most of the time, involves a lot of long hours at the office. Most people who make partner at big law firms studied a lot for their LSATs, they worked hard in law schools, and they suffered the tormented life of being an associate. Of course, you do have people that become rich by winning the lottery, and you will also have people that work hard, they're honest, they daven a lot, and they remain poor. But the Gemara tells us these are individuals. The Gemara, as Levi Goldman was medayik, is meduyuk when it says, harbe asu kein v'lo ho'ilu. In other words, generally speaking, for most people, harbe, you need these things if you are going to become rich. Now, of course, this doesn't mean there's no hashgacha. There is hashgacha. But, like we said, ein somchen al hanes. Now, this Gemara is certainly not telling us that we should aspire to wealth. It teaches us that if you're interested in becoming wealthy, this is what you should do. But don't fool yourself. It isn't easy being rich, nor is it easy being poor, nor is it easy being middle class, which, considering the cost of tuition, is the same thing as being poor. Certainly, the Torah warns us of the significant nisyonos of wealth. Pentochal v'savata, uvatim tovim tivne v'yashavta, uvikarcha v'tzoncha yirbiyun, v'chesed v'zahav yirbelach, v'chol asher l'cha yirbeh. V'amarta bilvavecha, kochi v'otzem yadi asali asachayel azeh. V'zacharta Hashem elokecha ki hu nosen l'cha koach lasos chayel. It's very hard to remember that your success comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu when it comes after a lot of hard work, and you're skilled, after all. And it's not just nisyonos. Generally speaking, like we said, the pursuit of wealth takes away from other important tasks. There's going to be less time for Talmud Torah, less family time, more stress. When someone has a lot of money, they're often thinking about money all the time, where to invest it, how to spend it. Though, of course, if you're poor, you're also thinking about money a lot of times. Can I afford this? Can I find it cheaper somewhere else? How am I going to pay the mortgage? It's a lot of stress there too. If we look at the Kara Kemach, Rabbeinu Bachya ben Asher points to the many mitzvos that we could do with wealth. Certainly tzedakah, but it's not just that. Shema Osher yu dvarim nishmayim. You can be impactful when you're wealthy. People will listen to you in a way that they won't if you aren't wealthy. And you could back up your initiatives with your own support. V'ma'osher yuchal lasos ha'maisim ha'ru'uyim v'ha'mif'alim ha'nivcharim asher bahem yimtza chen v'seichel tov b'einei Elokim v'adam k'inyan ma'isat tzedakah pizur ha'mamon b'mailos v'chol ha'midos chamuros ki ha'osher lo nivra ela sheyasa adam mitzvos. In fact, according to the Ravid, and many poskim accept this the halacha, a function of the Torah is recognizing the potential value of prosperity is to the extent that it's mutter to leave Eretz Yisrael laharvacha, not just to get by. Rashi at the beginning of our parsha says, Shnei goyim, shnei geim, Rabbi and Antoninus, who could afford radish and horseradish at their tables throughout the year. And it's not just an interesting fact what Rebbe had on his menu. It's telling us that Rebbe was able to accomplish great things because of his wealth, things that he couldn't have done if he was middle class. But Rabbeinu Bachya also notes that wealth comes with significant drawbacks. And it's not just that you'll have less time to learn. Hanezek, sharei beribui nimtzaim nizakim me'od, v'michsholos atzumim, ki hu siba lamidas hagaiva, v'anos azos. Like we said before, success often breeds arrogance. And it's not just that. V'av harabim yachziku es yado, al kol davar pesha. Everybody's going to flatter you. Nobody's going to tell you you're a jerk. Everybody's going to make you think you're doing the right thing. You're not even going to be able to tell what's right and what's wrong because you're always going to be getting support because everybody looks up to you. You'll become, or you may become, power hungry. And he continues. So in picking a profession, you certainly have to ask yourself, how much do I want to make? Do I want to become wealthy? That's not an obvious answer. It's not just as much as I can, and it's not just enough to get by. There are different drachim in avodas Hashem. There's the avoda of the ashir, and there's the avoda of the ani. There are other questions in choosing a profession, equally important, maybe more important. Like, will I like what I do? Where could I contribute the most? To the community, to society? Rabbeinu Bachya ben Pekuda in Shar Bitachon writes, in translation, there are many means to a livelihood. Some require little effort, such as shopkeeping and handicrafts. Others entail much trouble, such as tanning and mining. Every person prefers a particular occupation as God has implanted within his nature love and affection for it. Therefore, if you find your traits and nature luring you towards a particular profession that you're suited for and which you can withstand, then make it your own and endure the bitter and the sweet of it. Don't resent it if your livelihood is occasionally withheld from you. Trust in God that he will provide you with sustenance. In addition, have in mind that you're immersing yourselves in God's mitzvos as you work hard and become emotionally involved in whatever your profession you choose, because it is God who has commanded you to engage in a profession. And he continues, someone with this attitude, his trust, bitachon, will always remain intact. He's not going to be harmed by the search of earning a living. Don't believe that your livelihood depends on a particular source, and that if that source were to disappear, there would be no other means of earning a living. Rather, trust in Hashem, for he is the source of your livelihood, and he can sustain you. Bitachon certainly plays a role in choosing a profession. You don't have to pick something you hate. On the contrary, pick something you love. Rabbeinu Bachya warns that doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. There'll be times when it's hard. There'll be times that you don't have enough. Remember that what you're doing is a mitzvah. Hashem wants you to earn a living. That's the way he made the world. Both the boteach and the non-boteach work for a living. But the person without a bitachon is going to choose a profession that they dislike, believing that's the only way that they'll make it. But Rabbeinu Bachya tells us that since it's Hashem who determines our livelihood, we can choose something that we like. And that comes from deep within us, from a proclivity that God implants within us. Now, I don't think he means that a person who enjoys being a waiter can expect to make the same amount as a person who chooses to be a neurosurgeon. Rabbeinu Bachya doesn't say, work just one day a week, because Hashem, after all, chooses how much salary you're going to make anyway. Doing that would rely on a miracle, and ein somchen al hanes. I think what Rabbeinu Bachya is saying is, just as a mashal, let's say a person thinks, I need $150,000 to support my family. And there are two professions. Profession A, which he likes, has the earning power of 100 to 150,000. Profession B, which he doesn't like, makes between 150 and 200. So the boteach says, I could choose profession A, because if Hashem wants me to make that 150, I'll make it with profession A, the one that I like. It's not being somech al hanes. There are plenty of people in profession A who make that much money. So what factors go into choosing a career? What am I good at? What do I enjoy? Where will I contribute the most? And finally, what we started with. Do I want to be rich? So let's go back to that question for a moment. How do I know? We consider the pros and the cons, but what's right? What's the right answer? And the answer, as we've seen, is that it's an individual choice. Each of us is unique. Each of us has a mission. Each of our lives has a purpose that stems from that uniqueness. Every one of us should ask ourselves, how can I, with my skills, my talents, my proclivities, and my predilections, my passions, and my desires, how can I be Oved Hashem? There's no one else like me. No one in the history of the world has ever been created with these same skills, talents. What is my avoda? And the answer is different for all of us. For some people, the avoda is a life of simplicity. For others, they can do their best with more. Of course, we don't have time now to get into the question of how do I figure out what my tafkid is. But suffice it to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the ability, as Rabbeinu Bachya points out, to figure it out. And then we could ask ourselves, so how do I get there? What profession makes sense? How much should I try to make? We'll be able to ask the pros and the cons. And b'siyata d'shmaya will be zoche, not just to have enough to eat, but to succeed in the noble mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us.